Good morning. It's February 15th, 2022. Welcome to Triggered. I'm Cory Morgan. I hope you all had a good Valentine's Day. If you didn't, well, there's lots of sites where you can sign up and perhaps find a better date next year. The days are counting down now. Show is going to be coming to you live every day at 11:30 a.m. Mountain Standard, Monday to Friday. We do other break-in specials when news breaks, things like that as well through the Western Standard or on this show. And it's great being live. I mean, we get interrupted now and then, but this is part of being a news organization. We cover this stuff as it breaks and as it comes out. So the other part of being live is we have comments, we have interaction. So, get in there, make comments, chat with each other, debate with each other. I might read some to the guests. I can't promise always to be able to do that. But the interactivity is fantastic with this sort of thing. And I do see those comments. Just again, try to keep them civil, though. I mean, we can get a little crabby with each other, but we don't need to devolve into fighting. It ruins the experience of being on a live show. So I got a couple of good guests today, as always. I got Barbara Kay. Anybody who's been reading newspapers in Canada in the last few decades knows who Barbara Kay is. She's a veteran in the Canadian journalistic world, and she writes columns occasionally for the Western Standard. She's written a couple of very good ones. One that is going to be coming out this afternoon and one that came out a few days ago. So we're going to talk about that. And then I'm going to have Cornelius Christian. He's an associate professor of economics at Brock University, and he submitted a column as well about Scott Moe's reopening and what he's done or what he hasn't done in reducing restrictions. Is four things that Professor Christian feels that Premier Scott Moe still needs to do in Saskatchewan to make things better for citizens. Though I do think, provinces are moving in the right direction finally, right? We're getting there, agonizingly slowly. Now, we are an independent outlet. We aren't getting any tax dollars, any tax funding or subsidies whatsoever. We won't take them. That does mean we rely on sponsors, of course, to help pay those bills so we can keep bringing it to you. And I'm going to talk about one of them right now, and that's Bitcoin Well. In a time like right now, when the government is eyeing your money, they're talking insane measures such as going in and seizing bank accounts from people if they dared to support the truckers' convoy. Maybe you might want to hedge your bets into some different currencies and savings into different areas. Bitcoin Well helps you get involved in the digital currency world with Bitcoin. These guys guide you through it. They're a Western Canadian company, and they're safe. They are non-custodial. What that means is they never have possession of your Bitcoin. They just facilitate the transaction. It stays in your wallet. You always control it. So if you want to start putting some of your funds into Bitcoin, these are the guys to look into. We're going to help you along that road so you can safely consider putting your money in those things. They got all sorts of online set it and forget it plans, things like that. Go to bitcoinwell.com and check out the resources. These guys will bring you into the digital currency world safely, effectively, and I think it is time to start moving away from those central banks. We can't trust this government. I know they want to get after our digital currencies too, but they're going to be a heck of a lot harder than the stuff that we've got in their regulated banks. Check them out. Okay, well, and with what's got me going today, it's not hard to get a rant up this week. Justin Trudeau's panicked attempt to invoke the Emergencies Act, which is a rebranded version of the War Measures Act, isn't yet a done deal. They're acting as if it's done, but it's not. This proposal still has to come before the House of Commons and the Senate. Now, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh eagerly jumped onto Trudeau's dictatorial bandwagon and offered his full support for the suspension of Canadian rights. That's not terribly surprising. Socialists have never been well known for their respect of individual rights. That said, the left-leaning Canadian Civil Liberties Association has strongly condemned Trudeau's attempt to declare what amounts to a form of martial law upon Canadians. They understand the precedent being set could lead to such actions being taken against left-wing protests in the future as well, even if Singh doesn't understand that, or perhaps Singh doesn't care. His authoritarianism will override his actual ideologies in the end of things. These guys just want control. I don't hold out much hope, but perhaps there's a few principled NDP MPs who understand how important it is to oppose Trudeau's attempted power grab. I mean, the Toronto Star, which has long been Justin Trudeau's strongest media ally, at least in print, even they have called Trudeau's action a shocking admission of failure. Multiple Liberal MPs have already come out openly against Justin Trudeau's handling of the pandemic restrictions. So clearly there's at least a little dissent going on within the federal Liberal caucus. The vote on the Emergencies Act motion could be a catalyst for a caucus revolt. Not all of them want to go down in history as politicians who supported such action against Canadian citizens. It would take over 20 MPs to turn coat against the Liberals or the NDP to change that vote. It's a large number in a system prone to having MPs strictly adhering to the party line, but it's not insurmountable by any means. especially during such volatile and singular times as now. I mean, the world's gone crazy. I don't see it being beyond belief to see Liberal and NDP MPs coming out of their shells and actually voting on behalf of their constituents. The invocation of the Emergencies Act also has to pass through the Senate. It's difficult to judge what could happen in that chamber. Those guys, they're a different sort. The support for Trudeau's zeal for invoking the Emergencies Act may very well not be terribly strong inside there. The blockages at the Canadian border crossings are pretty much done with. And it had nothing to do with the actions of Trudeau or the Emergency Act. Local police resources directed by provincial governments proved to be sufficient in addressing those situations. In Ottawa, the mayor managed to cut a deal with protesters to move them out of residential areas voluntarily. The protesters can be reasoned with, and there's been no violence of note after weeks of them being present in Ottawa. There's simply no justification for Justin Trudeau to bring in the nuclear option of the Emergencies Act. Trudeau appears to be the only person who doesn't know this. Even Trudeau's second in command, Chrystia Freeland, looked visibly uncomfortable as she stood behind Trudeau at his press conference announcing his intent to invoke the Emergencies Act. I mean, if you can suffer through Trudeau's voice for a bit, check out that press conference and just look to the left and look at Freeland. She's twitching and squirming and scratching as she is not happy back there. Politicians tend to look out for their own skins first. They're going to be watching the actions and atmosphere among the public in the next few days. If they think they're putting themselves in a losing position, they will turn on their leaders in a heartbeat. That puts the ball into our court. Canadians have already been remarkably standing up for themselves this last few weeks. Tens of thousands have been peacefully demonstrating every weekend across the country, and it's been having an impact. Provinces are dropping restrictions, even if the federal government appears intractable. This weekend, we need to take it to the streets. We really do. We need citizens to come out in numbers previously unseen. The protests now need to move beyond just pushing back against pandemic restrictions, and they're into standing up for our most essential of rights. We have to stand up and let the federal government know we won't put up with these efforts to infringe on our freedoms. The government needs to know that invoking the Emergencies Act is only going to make the protests larger and stronger. This isn't about left or right anymore. It's about rights, individual rights. The world is watching Canada right now. Commentators and leaders are in shock over the implications of what Justin Trudeau is trying to do. We're at a turning point. We can stand up for ourselves right now or let the government set a precedent that could infringe on rights for generations. This is a call for action. Every major city in Canada is going to have protests this weekend. Find yours and join it. Set aside time this weekend. Invite and encourage other people to join you. If your community doesn't have a protest, consider organizing one. Modern social media tools give us the means for organization like we never had before. Nobody else is going to stand up for our rights, for your rights. We have to do it for ourselves. And now is our chance. Get out there this weekend, folks. We've got to let Trudeau know this is beyond the pale. We are not going to put up with it. Okay, that is what has got me going today, and I'm going to be talking about that all week. I'm going to the protests here in Calgary. I'm going to be encouraging other people to get out there peacefully, protest and assemble in large numbers. Yeah, and as Nico put up, you can follow me at Cory B. Morgan on Twitter. I'll certainly be constantly pushing and trying to remind people of how important this is. We don't have to take things sitting down anymore. Now, let's bring somebody in who is reporting on the news as it's breaking. We've got our news editor, Dave Naylor, on deck. Hey, Dave, how you doing?
Christia Freedom, Cory? That's quite a Freudian slip.
Oh, it was terrible. I know. I mean, I'm not sure where that went, but I'm certain it won't apply.
As one of the commentators said, perhaps Christia Freeloader would also be appropriate.
That works out quite well.
Yeah. Busy morning in the news again, Cory. I know I'm starting to sound like a broken record the last couple of weeks. Our lead story at the moment is the sudden resignation of Ottawa's police chief, Chief Slolis. He is announcing his resignation to the police board this afternoon, according to numerous CBC sources. They say he just became too difficult to work with. He was screaming and yelling at high-ranking commanders over their actions at the protest site, and had just become a bully, causing problems even with the RCMP as they came in to try and help him. So he has been pilloried by the Liberal Party for not being able to get the truckers out of there. So he's gone as of this afternoon, I think. So that's a big story and doing very well on our site. You remember the fall of Afghanistan, Cory, in August. Canada was the first embassy to flee and close up shop, stranding more than 1,000 Canadians in the country. The ambassador there at the time, Ambassador Sims, just got out and left, shut the embassy down. There were still Canadian soldiers there, and they testified at a House of Commons hearing last night that they were embarrassed by their own country's actions, and things didn't help much on the ground. My favorite story of the day is the feds paid a company $70,000 to ask people in the Arctic, in Nunavut, what they thought about global warming. So for that $70,000, they phoned 35 people and asked them, and the basic response was, "Bring it on. We want global warming. It's kind of cold up here in the Arctic." So that's another huge waste of taxpayers' money. We got the latest from Coots, Cory. Some good video of RCMP and the protesters shaking hands, embracing, and those truckers are pulling out this morning. They should probably all be gone by now. I know there are plans to go back and sort of make sure the area is cleaned up and spotless and just the way they arrived. I don't think we've heard the last of the group, though, Cory. I think they've got some other plans up their sleeves, perhaps coming out as early as this weekend, but it won't be involving the blockade. So we've got some more breaking news out of Ottawa that I'll be writing up. They are dropping PCR testing for incoming travelers at the border. So that'll be good news. Calgary City Council is debating whether or not to discontinue or to continue with their mask bylaw. That's being covered by our reporter, Eva. So, yeah, lots of good stuff on the site already, Cory, and more to come.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Dave. I'll let you get back at it. You got a heck of a lot to write. As somebody pointed out, Dave looks like he hasn't slept in a week. I know he's not trying to be too rude, but you are tired. You've had a heck of a week for a number of reasons. I mean, it is worth mentioning that there was the passing of a very good friend of yours, and an icon in Calgary media with Ian Robinson the other day, and it's really worn on a lot of people. So,
yeah, he was for those who never even heard of Ian Robinson. He was sort of a behind-the-scenes guy at the Calgary Sun for many years, and wrote a weekly column. 6 years ago, he got stage 4 diagnosis of cancer, and he battled it for 6 years with dignity, and he wrote about it in the Cancer Center's Wellspring magazine, and he inspired a lot of people, and he lost the battle on Saturday. So. Yeah, it's been a long few days, Cory, that's for sure.
Absolutely. Okay, well, thanks for checking in, Dave, and we'll see you after the show.
Thanks, Cory.
Great, thanks. And yeah, I mean, as for myself, I was inspired by guys like Ian, and that I liked his. If you remember his columns, he had a good knack for snark, and that's certainly something I appreciate. And it's to see somebody going that young. The cancer is just such an awful, unfair disease, and it hits us, touches us all one way or another. So a lot of the theme, though, what we're seeing on news, and it's interesting, is we're watching, though, the battles almost, but going on over restrictions being dropped, and it's happening. In Calgary City Hall, they're fighting as we speak right now because some members say, well, the province is dropping the mask mandates, the city should as well. And of course, control types like Gondek and Giancarlo Carra just want to maintain control as much as humanly possible. So they want to keep those mandates beyond the Alberta government dropping it. I feel for Calgary businesses, particularly in retail, hospitality, things like that. Because again, despite what people say, masks suck. They're a pain in the ass. They ruin our ability to express with each other, to smile at each other, to talk with each other. And we don't want to go out and socialize with those things on. We can't see our friends and properly have a good time that way. And we've already seen, I'm going to be talking actually with Mike Thomas, one of our columnists who talks about real estate. We've got quite a trend with explosive growth going on in satellite cities outside of Calgary, while growth within the center of the city is slowing further and further. And that's from a decade of niche and bad city planning. And I mean, also some of it was beyond their control. It's the oil fields collapse and things such as that. But the city of Calgary has to compete with outside businesses. And people they are going to drive to Okotoks to go out for supper. They're going to go to Airdrie to go to a nightclub. They're going to go to Cochrane to go shopping because they don't want to sit in those muzzles. And that all comes at the expense of existing Calgary businesses. You know, Terry Wong, I was watching before the show came on. He's a councillor who I've known for a long time, and he's fairly conservative typically, but he's saying, well, some businesses are concerned that customers will feel uncomfortable if people are unmasked. Look, if that's your kind of business, keep the mask in your own business. It's private. You can have whatever you like. You can demand that people wear a gorilla costume before entering. That's up to you. We don't need the laws for it. And I honestly do not for a second think that there's that many people terrified to move around into a place that doesn't have masks. And if they do, then they've got bigger issues going on than COVID. And I hope they can get some help, because if they're that afraid of the world, a mask is the least of their worries and issues. But these are the discussions going on. And I'll be talking to the Professor Cornelius there a little later too, because we're seeing restrictions dropping in Saskatchewan. We want to see more of that. Federally, they're talking about, reducing some of the testing requirements, getting across the border. I think there's some will coming from the Liberal government, even though they know they don't want to look like they got pushed around by the protesters, but they know they got to start dropping some of these bloody regulations. So I don't care. I've said that on shows before. I don't care what reasoning they use. They can lie to me as to why they did it. It doesn't matter. Just do it. Just do it. Get rid of these. These protests aren't stopping, and I'm going to keep nagging for them. And as Dave pointed out, they've left the border in Coots. You know, they've done the bulk of the reasonable ones down their field. They've done everything they can. They've made their message. They're moving along, but they're not gone, and they're still upset. And as I've talked about with Calgary, or somebody was talking about Okotoks, in a lot of areas all over Alberta, we can still protest and we can still get rolling. And I suspect these guys are going to show up there. I'll talk a little later in the show about a bit of what's gone on down in Coots, though. I mean, as we've said, we're still waiting for the facts to come out on those arrests of, I believe it was 13 people, and the seizure of a number of firearms, but really slim on details about what that was about. But one thing that we can say for sure what happened there is the majority of the protesters in Coots wanted absolutely nothing to do with that. They had nothing to do with those guys. That's part of why they're moving along and saying, look, we do not want to be smeared with that craziness. That's not what we're about. That's never what we're about. So we're going to move along and take our protests and actions elsewhere. There's a lot of reason to mistrust the RCMP and not necessarily be sure about the story that they're giving on that one. But again, I've had enough life experience with some pretty crazy people in the past that it's not beyond belief that a dozen, crazy people have met each other and found each other and thought that that's the place to try and start some kind of insane revolution as well. The bottom line, though, is it did not reflect the protesters at all. That was not what they were there for. And they refused to give it any time. And they are now moving away from there. Those protests are leaving Coots. The border is reopening. It takes that pressure off. And again, it shows similarly to the idiot waving the Confederate flag who got driven away from the protests in Ottawa. And now whatever the heck happened with these firearms down there, the real genuine protesters, and that's the vast majority of them, do not want any part of that extremism, that violence, or any of those things. And they will either leave the site or they will drive out the other person from their site. So this isn't finished by any means, but the Coots protest looks like it is finished. So looks like we've got our first guest on deck to bring her in. I've been looking forward to this. We've got Barbara Kay. She, as I said earlier in the show, if you've been reading any publications in Canada over the last while, I won't date her saying exactly how long, but it's been quite a few years that she's been out there getting a lot of content out. You know Barbara Kay's name, and it's just a privilege to be able to get her on the show today to talk to about a couple of her columns. So let's bring her in here. And hey, Barbara, how you doing?
I'm fine, Cory. Thanks for having me on today.
Oh, glad to virtually meet you, after all those editorial discussions through email and such.
That's right.
So, we've got a couple, and you just submitted another one. I gave a teaser. Well, I'll get that up probably this afternoon. But your first column was on the Conservative Party of Canada leadership race. You're, of course, a very in tune political watcher and and you're seeing a potential opportunity for the Conservative Party to, I guess you could say, recapture the support of women. I mean, it's always been a soft area for them.
It is, and in fact, the gap between male and female voters for Conservatives is actually quite significant. If they had even closed half that gap in the last election, I think we would have seen a conservative government. So I think they do have a problem with women voters. And I think that they're kind of been oblivious to that problem for them. I remember I interviewed Aaron O'Toole when he was running for the leadership, and I queried him on that, and I said, I think you have an opportunity if you would step into these latest debates over gender. I think that women are at a serious disadvantage under the new gender ideology, and you could be big heroes for women if you undertook that file and said, we stand up for women and parents. We're opposed to ideologies that promote inclusivity that advantages biological males at the expense of women. So to me, it's a no-brainer because this is a growing problem. There are areas where we know from polls, there is a broad acceptance amongst ordinary people that women are getting shafted in order to provide inclusion for biological males who identify as women. And you know what the areas are, sport, prisons, and private spaces like rape crisis shelters and locker rooms, that sort of thing.
Yeah, we just need to inject some common sense back into it, and can still be, I believe, common sense and inclusive. There's actually a couple of transgendered activists who are very conservative, and they do understand that it's a reach. It's still they want to be women, or they're considered women. They are women. I will accept that. If a person identifies as such, I'll happily recognize them as such. But going into some physiological realities we have to face with prisons. And sports, which is terrible. I mean, also women's shelters. There were some who had and this person hadn't even transitioned fully yet. They just identified as such. So you've got a number of abused women gathered, and now they have to share space with a biological man. It was horrific.
Yeah, I push back a little on you see what you said. If they feel that way, if they think they're a woman, well, I'll go along with that. But I don't think you should, Cory, because you're being polite, you're being nice. But when you say to a biological male, well, if you feel like a woman, if you feel you are a woman, then I will say with you, okay, a man who feels like a woman is a woman. But when you say that, you're actually acquiescing to legal ramifications that flow from the statement that you can change your sex, you can change your gender, you can identify all you want as another gender. But sex and gender are two different things, and there are spaces in the world, and also according to our charter, that are protected spaces for biological women. Has nothing to do with gender. And wanting to be nice, I think that's the problem with Canadians. So eager to be nice and to be thought of as inclusive that, and they don't want to be called transphobic. I mean, I am routinely called transphobic because I am in favor of women's rights being protected, their sex rights being protected. I don't think it's transphobic to want to protect women's charter rights. But that's what we're made to believe. So, ordinary people don't believe this. Ordinary people are not on board for this idea that you can change your sex because of how you feel. That's a fantasy. That's magical thinking. I call it gender mysticism. I think, I feel, therefore I am. But it doesn't work like that in certain areas. It's okay for, a lawyer to say it, or an artist, or a police officer, but it's not okay for a swimmer, say, who is a biological male and who is setting incredible new records in the women's division when he was a mediocre swimmer competing against other men. So this is like doping. Our bodies are what they are. No amount of, surgery can change the outward appearance, but nothing can change who we are in our DNA and our genes. I would say that if and I do advise the next leader to forget about abortion and forget about gay marriage, all that. That's over. It's that's a settled, and stirring it up. I mean, all you can do is give people the right to freedom of speech to talk about it as much as they want, to argue for it and not to call them hateful when they do argue for the rights of unborn children or anything like that, or call them misogynistic. You shouldn't do that. But this is a whole new area that has come about in the last, I would say, about since 2015. It has become a huge political issue, and everybody's kind of looking the other way because they don't want to be called transphobic. I really wish, in fact, I feel so strongly about it that if the next leader of the Conservative Party does not grasp that nettle, they won't have my support, because they're just playing at politics. That'll tell me that all they're trying to do is to be softer liberals, or to be, because this is a huge conservative issue. Science, and really, being pro-science and pro-biology and pro-objectivity, that should be a conservative issue.
No, absolutely. I guess, yeah, in the way, it's a legally loaded word or a term to say outright that you recognize that person as a woman. I guess, I see that's what makes it complicated. At the same time, I mean, I'm of a mind, I mean, I had to grow a lot. I have to admit, I was somewhat intolerant of gay people when I was a young man in the 90s, and we used to call them terrible names. And I thought gay marriage was a ridiculous concept. And I've come around and said, you know what? It's not harming anybody. By all means, be happy, do what you will. But it took me some time. And I want, if a person goes trans as well, to be as happy as possible. But at the same time, yeah, we still have to be able to recognize biological reality and science without being driven into the background through, as you said, the name calling and things like that. So you think the Conservative Party, though, can find that balance? Like, that's a difficult, when you've got to explain something in so many minutes like that, it is hard to campaign at a doorstep.
I think it's pretty simple. I think there's one question. Do you believe that women need protections in certain areas for their? Do you think women have sex-based rights in the Charter need protections in areas such as, just name them: sport, prisons, rape crisis shelters? If you do, I'm going to make sure that the legislation that has been passed that allows biological men to compete against women or to be in those spaces are repealed or rescinded, or whatever you do. I would say the Conservative Party believes in fairness and safety first, and then inclusion. But we do believe in inclusion, and we believe that trans people have full rights, but nobody has the right to take away rights from other people in order to have rights for themselves. That's something we don't believe in, and we're not going to see it continue to happen. I think you could do a 30-second elevator pitch along those lines quite easily if you hone it. There's no problem with it, and it would be the right thing to do. So people think, oh, the Conservatives aren't for women. Here's an area where they could be for, and they could also make Trudeau look very bad. He's backed himself into a corner with this women, men, biological males can go into women's prisons and all that. He's taken a stand. He used to be the big feminist. So he can't get out of that. He's committed himself to that. And you don't have to say we're against trans people. You say we're for women, we're for children, we're for parents having a say in their children's instruction when it has to do with theory over science. I mean, I don't know. I could write them. I could write them a paragraph. I could put the whole thing into a paragraph for them, but they're not serious. So far, I haven't seen a single Conservative leader who is actually serious about wanting to deal with this issue. They want it to go away. They don't want to know about it. They don't want to hear about it. That's not leadership. It's a big issue. It's huge, and it's getting bigger.
Yeah, and you're being preemptive and at least bringing it up and saying you guys you've got to find your position on this, and it could be an opportunity. I like how you framed it, because you're right. I mean, as parents, women their kids are competing in athletic sports, they want to make sure their kids have a fair opportunity to be able to compete, things like that. It's not being unreasonable. It's not being hateful. They want their daughters to be safe if they end up in a shelter or something like that.
Listen, they are the ones that are unreasonable. But the minute you use that word, then you're called a transphobe. They just shut down debate on it. Of course, it's reasonable to assume that a male who is intrinsically stronger and bigger and faster and all the other thing than a woman should not be competing against a woman. It's totally unfair and totally unreasonable. But I'm sort of baffled. This is such a natural subject for them, because conservatives do want to protect their daughters and their wives and the women that they love in the world. It's a very conservative position that I'm advocating, and they're not, and they don't want to go for it, or so far nobody has. And I call that cowardice and weakness. You can't lose by it. Yes, you'll be called a transphobe, but the only people that'll be screaming that are the activists. They're not as many as you think. They're all over Twitter, but they're not ordinary Canadians.
And Twitter is not the real world by any means. And it's going to be an election issue, whether they want to address it or not. So they better figure out where they're going to stand on it. You're absolutely right. And stake their ground, because if they come in it defensively, they're going to lose, as they have over and over and over again on those issues.
Yeah.
So I'll kind of pivot for our last few minutes, though. I mean, yeah, that's great. And again, I'll remind people, go to westernstandardonline.com and you'll see Barbara's column on that at length. And it's very, very good, as always. And you wrote another one that, again, Nico won't be able to pull it up because I haven't edited it yet. You just said it this morning, but it's great. And it's talking about the mental illing of people, to use a term for it. Can you expand on what that's about?
Yeah, I hadn't seen that term before, but I I did see it when I saw the news about this teacher in China. She is pregnant, and last month, she got into trouble last month when she published, she's a writer as well as a teacher, and she published an essay that disagreed with some historical whatever. And that was quickly removed from her site. And so she was watched, and she was, reprimanded and everything. And finally, she was placed into a psychiatric institution, and they've called the term mental illing a person, by that. It's a political term, to when you deal with a political dissident by declaring them in need of mental health treatment and taken out of public operation. She managed to get a social media post, I don't know if it was Instagram or TikTok or whatever it was, saying they're coming for me, or they're taking me through it, and I'm very concerned about my unborn child. And so that was how people knew about it. Fortunately, social media can be work for bad or good, and in this case, she managed to get one last post in before they took her away. So now everybody knows that she's been taken to a psychiatric institution to deal with her political incorrectness. And it just, as soon as I read that story, you could tell from my age that I grew up during the Cold War with Russia. And one of the most chilling aspects of Soviet, the way Soviet authorities dealt with people who had wrong ideas or false consciousness, or who did not toe the party line, was to treat them as though they were mentally ill, because only an insane person would not understand that what we say is the truth, what the party says is the truth, is an absolute truth. And if you can't see that, then the only explanation can be that you are mentally ill. It was a very logical, Karl Marx himself said it. When you're that sure of your ideology, then you treat people, and we have somebody, of course, naturally I was making the point because although the outcomes for Soviet dissidents were far more draconian than they are here, but that mindset, that's a leftist mindset, extreme left, where it's so clear to you what the acceptable way to think is, and what the science. Karl Marx treated his theories as science. He said they were a science, and historic inevitability was part of the scheme. And that was the way the world was going, whether dissidents liked it or not. So what do you do with dissidents? They're getting in the way of the perfecting of the world. You can't. How long will such people be tolerated? And of course, in the Soviet Union, they weren't tolerated very long at all. They weren't. So sometimes, they were only went to prison or the gulag, and sometimes they were shot, and sometimes they went to psychiatric institutions, especially the writers and the scientists and the people who they were most afraid of, and they wanted to get them out of public view. And they did try to, when they were in these institutions, they were treated as people who were crazy and that needed correction. They were very often tortured, and even when they left the institution, they would be put into re-education camps, as China is doing now. So when I saw that China was adopting this tactic from the Soviet Union, China's worst days, we thought their worst communist days were behind them with Mao Zedong and the Cultural Revolution. And we thought China was opening up, and they had, were warmer to the West, and they were, open to Western forms of not true democracy, but certainly a more open society than they'd had before. And that did seem to be the case for some years. But as we've seen in the last decade and more, it's going the opposite way. It's going right back to where, not right back, there are differences, but that attitude of repressing any kind of speech that does not toe the party line is there, and we know that it's there. And that was one reason I felt we should not have, we should have boycotted these Olympics. But using the tactic of calling people crazy because they dissent and putting them in psychiatric institutions, I'm not saying that I think that's going to happen here. I don't think it is, but the mindset is the same. It's if you're not on board with us, then you are a racist, misogynist. Andrew Coyne called these people antisocial yobs with delusions of grandeur. That he's a senior columnist with the Globe and Mail. He's a very senior journalist in Canada altogether, and he labeled these people. The word antisocial has a long history too. And it means, people you don't want. They're, as Mr. Trudeau said, they're taking up space. I find all these words reminiscent of an authoritarianism that is quite ugly. And I'm not saying people are going to be hauled away to psychiatric institutions, but when people are shunned or canceled, or their bank accounts are frozen because they support certain protests, you have the same mindset. It's just a question of degree. So Professor John Faraday, many years ago, called this mindset velvet totalitarianism, and I think he was absolutely right. It's the same principles, same values, and the same certainty that there is only one science, one way to go. I mean, we've seen with the gender thing that if you want insanity, you only have to look at gender ideology, which says that, men can magically become women and women can magically become men by thinking that they are. This was the kind of insanity in the Soviet Union, where they had, if we decide we're going to have a plentiful harvest, then we'll have one. And if we don't have one, we'll say that we had one, even though people are starving.
Yeah, the dehumanizing of people who are of a political viewpoint different than yours is a terrible trend, and it's wrong. And as you said, we're not locking them in mental institutions, but when you ostracize people like that, when you tell their friends and neighbors that you shouldn't pay attention to people like that, when you say that, I mean, there was even talk about saying, you shouldn't welcome people into your family meals if they hold those viewpoints. Yep. That is another form, in my view, just as bad as putting them into a mental institution. You're taking them and telling others to
I so
separate
agree.
them.
I so agree. Shunning people is a very terrible. That's why we don't. That's why we're isolation in prison, solitary confinement is now considered an abusive, unusual form of abuse, and we don't really do it anymore unless for more than a couple of days. It's a terrible way to treat your fellow citizens or to speak about them. Deplorables. It's divisive. It's. I find it very ugly, and I find that Trudeau has become um, less tolerant over the years. Less open to other points of view, and he doesn't even pretend. He doesn't even pretend to be, you know, sunny. Whatever happened to Mr. Sunny Ways? That's all. That's
Those
long
are
gone. That's
those
long.
are long gone. And I was just sort of flattened. I mean, Coyne's always been a little bit snobby. That's his nature, but he's a very intelligent man, and he's written some fantastic things over the years. And he would know the implications of where he's going with that as much as anybody. So I was sort of floored. I mean, I could see him opposing this, but going down that road as he did was just beyond the pale.
Yeah, whatever happened to, I disagree with these people. I hold a different view. Not you don't talk about people's opinions in terms of acceptable and non-acceptable unless, of course, they're obviously hateful but nobody's saying anything hateful. People that have different views about the vaccine, they may be misinformed. You may think they're misinformed. But some of their, they might have very legitimate reasons why they would want to. But we're not even talking about that because that's not the issue. The issue is the mandates. And when you have 80, 90% of people in a country that are vaccinated, that's just a ridiculous overkill. That's unnecessary. It's non-productive. And you're talking about people whose jobs, of all people in the country, are least likely to be, associating with masses of people. They work alone. And they don't even go indoors most of the time. So there is a degree of insanity in this. When the rest of the world is opening up, you have this one leader he's cracking down for the sake of cracking down. He likes the power. He likes lording it over. I mean, I don't want to get it into deep psychological.
That's fodder for another column. But
I think so.
Yeah, but we are just right in a time that we never imagined we would see, and it's a volatile one, and that makes it a dangerous one. So as you said, we're all the world's gone a little insane. Whether it's being declared by the state that way or just the way it's gone in general. But I appreciate your columns injecting some sanity into that and the discourse. And I thank you very much for coming on today to expand on those. I hope we can get the chance to talk again as your future columns come out.
It was a real pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Cory.
Oh, thank you. No, it was great having you on. Like I said, and I've loved reading your stuff, and I look forward to it. It was a great chat, and we just kind of ran it against the clock. So
yep.
I'll let you get back to your day, and we'll talk again soon, Barbara.
Okay. Thanks, Cory. Take care.
Thanks. Yeah, that was a great chat. I love a good conversation like that. And again, so get on to westernstandardonline.com and check it out. And of course, if you search for Barbara Kay, I mean, she's a very prolific writer. There are columns all over the place, and they are fantastic. But of course, we're going to plug our own site predominantly with that, and the westernstandardonline.com is where it's at. And that reminder to everybody, take out a membership. It's $10 a month. It'll be well worth your while. It's just like the price of an old newspaper subscription in the past. That gets you past the firewall, or the paywall, I guess I should say. And you can get full access. You get a free trial for 2 weeks. Check it out. Hey, if we thought we were trying to scam people, we'd never offer that free 2-week trial because they'd be ticked off after. We know that once you try it for free for 2 weeks, you're going to say, yes, this is worth my $10 a month, and you'll stay on and keep that subscription. And the subscriptions have been fantastic lately, and that's how we can get such great content and columnists and news writing that we have. So if you haven't already subscribed, get on there, take out that membership, see all the stuff that's there. Not to mention, since you're watching right now, if you're watching on Facebook, whether it's on Rumble, whether it's on YouTube, make sure to subscribe, like, follow, all those button pushes. I know all the social media types nag you for it. There's a reason for it. It helps us get the word out there, spread the word, and we can bypass that wretched mainstream media that just doesn't, unfortunately, give you a good balanced picture of things. So as well, when it comes to Rumble, I do try to urge followers. We don't plan on getting kicked off, but social media has been difficult to judge these days, and Rumble seems to be one of the ones least inclined to suddenly pull the rug out from under you. So make sure to subscribe on Rumble and follow us there so that you can always have access to our shows as they go. Our viewership has been building, and it's been great getting great guests. So thank you all who have been following so far and just keep following. So I got my next guest, it looks like on deck pretty quickly here. I've been looking forward to this as well. And again, it's going to be some restrictions talk. I know we're all tired of it, but we're tired of the restrictions, and we need some more common sense injected into that discussion. I will speak to one of our sponsors first before I get to Mr. Christian, and that's the Canada Shooting Sports Association. These guys, their name describes what they are. They're an association for people who like shooting sports. They have resources on their website, which is CSSA-CILA.org. Bit of a mouthful. If you look it up, Canada Shooting Sports Association. Resources from videos on safe operation of firearms. They've got links to where there's going to be trade shows, things like that in your area, stuff like that. And they support, they're just an area to network with other firearms owners, whether you're a collector or a target shooter or a hunter, whatever you like. It's your business. And that's part of the problem you have is we've got a federal government who thinks it's their business, and they want to take away your ability to safely and responsibly use firearms. The Canada Shooting Sports Association is supporting a number of legal challenges against the federal government on behalf of firearm owners, but they need your help. Kind of like I was talking about with the protests and everything too. You have to stand up for yourself, or the government will take your rights away. So take out a membership with these guys if you value your firearms and your ability to have them, and help them help you maintain those rights. Okay, so I am going to get on with scrolling through my teleprompter so I can see where my stuff was. And this is Associate Professor of Economics from Brock University, Cornelius Christian. And he wrote a column for the Western Standard a little while back talking about Premier Moe and 4 more things he needs to do to go beyond what he has in dropping restrictions. There we go. It says, Premier Moe needs to do more. So let's bring Cornelius in and expand on what he's written there.
Hi, Cory. How are you? Thanks.
Very good. Oh, it's a pleasure to have you. I appreciate it, and I appreciated your column there. So, I guess if I could just get you straight into it to start kind of breaking down what are the, Professor Premier Moe has been one of the most proactive, at least, in saying he's going to drop some restrictions, mandates, regulations. But there were 4 more things you felt he needs to do.
Yeah, so Premier Moe has gotten a lot of, I think, accolades from people online for agreeing to lift restrictions. And I think that's great. I think that he listened to the people, he listened to his citizens, he listened to truckers, and he's now lifting restrictions, I think, which is in line with what the science has been saying for a long time now. But remember, this is the same Premier Moe who back in August of 2021 said, we will not bring back restrictions. Back in July, he had lifted all prior restrictions, including masking, and he had said, we will not bring them back. And in September, 2 weeks later, he brought them back. So if Premier Moe really wants us to take him seriously, he needs to do 4 more things at least. And the first thing he needs to do is he can't just lift the mandates and the restrictions. He actually has to ban them. Ron DeSantis in Florida has already done this. He needs to ban mandates, restrictions, anything else that has to do with COVID, so that if, for example, you're a business that continues to require proof of vaccination, you would get slapped with a fine. If you are somebody who fires a worker because that worker doesn't have vaccination for COVID, if that worker is fired, they would be reinstated and they would be paid 2 years damages. And so that's the first thing that needs to be done. The second thing needs to be done is that we need to shore up privacy. We have a lot of people now all over the place, and we have a lot of institutions which have people's private medical records regarding their vaccination status. And that's not really good. We need to be assured that those institutions will clear that data, and that data is going to be protected under enhanced privacy laws. We also need to make sure that people's medical status is protected under the Saskatchewan Human Rights Code. The third thing is we always hear talk about hospital capacity being overwhelmed. And, if that's the case, restrictions aren't going to always help that. You need to increase hospital capacity. So the first thing that, or the third thing that Scott Moe needs to do is actually increase hospital capacity in Saskatchewan. And he needs to, invest more in wards, invest more in hiring more nurses. There was a huge failure in handling the pandemic to the point that they actually the legacy media was reporting that people were actually shipped out of the province for treatment in other provinces. So in my view, the SHA, the Saskatchewan Health Authority, which is the governing body for all healthcare in the province, that board has to be fired and has to be replaced with people who know the job that they're doing. And the fourth thing that needs to be done is that Scott Moe needs to apologize. He needs to apologize for demonizing the unvaccinated. This is the guy, by the way, who said that the unvaccinated should be made to feel uncomfortable in their own province. And this is just language that is completely wrong. It's just unheard of. It's not acceptable. And Premier Moe needs to apologize. There needs to be a heartfelt apology. And that these four things at a minimum can bring us back to some semblance of normality.
Yeah, well, and it was good to hear and refreshing. I mean, we're at a point now where some of the things are dropping, and it's good, but we can't let them off the hook. The parallels between Saskatchewan and Alberta and this whole thing are very strong and striking. Jason Kenney's open for good last summer. He made no bones about it. We're never restricting. We're never locking down again. Maybe he absolutely meant it at the time, but he was obviously wrong, and he turned back on that. We went back into lockdown. As well, he promised that we would never have a vaccine passport. Well, we got a vaccine passport. We need to have that confidence that then as we reopen, as we drop restrictions, we're just not going back into a cycle again. And we need to corner them right now while they're open and get these commitments to reduce the chances, I guess, of them turning around on this.
Absolutely. Scott Moe in his conference, when he was announcing the lifting of restrictions, he was asked by a journalist what would happen if hospitals start to get overwhelmed again. And he said, well, we might have to discuss bringing back things like passports and restrictions. And that's just not acceptable. I mean, there was a Johns Hopkins study recently, and I think your viewers will have known about it. The Johns Hopkins study showed that lockdowns, restrictions have at most a very small effect on preventing COVID deaths. On the other hand, they do cause a lot of collateral damage in terms of things like mental health, drug overdoses, suicides, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. People get laid off work, and then there are problems with that. There's all kinds of health problems associated with restrictions. And we can never bring back restrictions for something like COVID. That's just unacceptable. And this kind of language that the restrictions are contingent on hospital capacity, we need to do away with that completely. If hospital capacity is your main focus, increase hospital capacity. Don't bring back restrictions to protect hospital capacity. If we have a bad flu year, for example, are we going to have more restrictions again? Are we going to bring back masking? This will never end if this kind of language is adopted. So Scott Moe needs to be brave, he needs to be bold, and he needs to do these four things. And it starts with just banning restrictions and mandates outright.
Well, absolutely. And that discussion of finding ways to increase our hospital capacity, and it's the same here as well. I mean, we were raising alarm bells in Alberta and lighting our hair on fire because we were getting near 100 people in the ICU at one point. It's a little over that now. And they're saying this is about to bring the system to its knees. We're a province of 4.5 million people. How does 100 beds after 2 years of this? If this was the first weeks, we could perhaps be a little bit forgiven. But we haven't come anywhere closer to being able to handle or manage this. So there's definitely going to be an ongoing fear of us being locked down yet again if we don't increase that capacity in every province.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that all provinces, I think, can do. And the federal government could have actually helped with that, would have been to give more funds to increase hospital capacity to an extent where this doesn't become a problem anymore. And I mean, there was some investment, I understand, in hospital capacity, but clearly it wasn't enough if we're still saying that we need to lock down, if we're still saying, as you said, that 100 beds is already overwhelming a population of 4 million. I mean, this is just unacceptable in a country like Canada, which is a wealthy country, which should be able to afford to take care of sick people. I mean, one of our prides is our healthcare system, and We talk about Tommy Douglas. We can go back to the introduction of Medicare and so on. And that's a point of national pride for Canadians. But it should not be a point of national pride that a small increase in the need for hospital beds completely overwhelms the system. And that's just not acceptable at all.
No, and we're always running at about 96% capacity, even in non-COVID times. A lot of people perhaps don't realize that. If you search past stories, we see numerously times when large flu outbreaks overwhelm the hospitals. And we should have addressed this a long time ago. And even now, though, aside from, from people like yourself and columnists, we're not seeing political leaders coming out and saying it's time to reform the system yet. They're still terrified of even challenging that institution of our healthcare system in Canada that we've sort of canonized as being, flawless, and clearly it needs some improvement. We need to start opening those discussions up on that sacred cow. I mean, it doesn't mean gutting it, but we have to have a frank discussion on how well it's serving us.
Oh, absolutely. I 100% agree with you. Canada is I think, if you look at our wait times, it's some of the worst in the OECD countries. We've got a lot of problems with our healthcare system that need to be fixed. I think we might be one of the only OECD countries that has only a public or primarily a public healthcare system. So we don't have both a public and a private healthcare system acting in kind of adjacency with each other and competing with each other. We just have the public state-run healthcare system. And that's caused a lot of problems, as you kind of mentioned. And you're right. If there's a bad flu year, and there have been bad flu years before COVID, again, we have an overwhelming of our hospital capacity. So Mo really needs to fix this, and he needs to apologize. I mean, saying that you will not bring back restrictions and then bringing them back 2 weeks later. I mean, this is unacceptable. These are red lines that have been crossed. Apologize, ban it, fix it, make sure that people's health data is protected, and make sure this never happens again.
Yeah, apologies are often a very difficult thing to get out of politicians, but it has happened before. I wish more would study, the history of a very successful one, whether you loved him or hate him. But Ralph Klein was incredibly popular and effective in Alberta, and there was a number of times he screwed up. But you know what? He was the first one to get up there and say, "Hey, look, I screwed up, and I won't do it again, and I am sorry." And you got to be genuine about it. And people felt that he was. But I mean, you can't. We know that you can only legislate your way to block things in the future so much. I mean, you can always reverse legislation, but if a premier is actually taking the trouble to genuinely apologize, I doubt they're going to want to put themselves back into that circumstance again.
Yeah, and I don't want to be too hard on Mo, but he hasn't even been a little bit apologetic for his actions. He said quite unequivocally, I believe that the vaccines passports have worked. I believe that the vaccine passports were the right idea. He even said in the press conference that the benefits outweighed the risks of the passports at the time, even though he later admitted that the passports themselves and the vaccines themselves have zero effect on the transmission or spread of the virus. So, I mean, this kind of double language that he's invoking is really troubling. And it's I mean, he needs to just, as you say, like Ralph Klein did, and like other politicians who have the confidence to do so, get up there, apologize to Saskatchewanians, apologize for, putting mandates that have coerced people into getting this jab. This is unacceptable. People should have a free choice about what medical treatments that they want to choose in consultation with their doctor. They shouldn't be coerced into it on threat of not being able to travel or losing employment or not being able to access certain services.
Another concern that you pointed out was, of course, there's so much private medical data that's now been spread all over the place. And I don't know if that's toothpaste we can get back into the tube. I mean, you want to mitigate it and stop it, but I think almost like the firearms registry too. I mean, that data all went out, and we know darn well that it was supposed to be destroyed. The RCMP never did, and it's kind of out there in the world. They won't update it anymore, but the damage is kind of done. What could be done to try and contain some of that data?
Well, yeah, this is the problem that you kind of highlight, right? Once you sort of decide that medical data, people's private medical data can be held by pretty much anybody, any employer, any institution, you already are opening a can of worms. What other kind of data can my employer have, right? Can they have data on what religion I follow? Can they have data on my other medical history, right? Like my other diseases or other kind of things that I've had. Can they have data on people that I know? This is all kind of problematic. I think the privacy legislation needs to be shored up so that there are penalties for employers and for people holding on to this data longer than is necessary. And I also think that the Saskatchewan Human Rights Code needs to have a section that would make medical history its own category. We already protect people on the basis of race, on the basis of religion, on the basis of sexual orientation, etc. We need to start to protect people on the basis of their medical history. That way, people will not be discriminated against based on whether they've had a vaccine, but whether they don't have a vaccine, whether they have a mask exemption or not. You know, people with mask exemptions, people with legitimate mask exemptions, people who have asthma and so on, have been treated like second-class citizens. They've been forced to wait outside a store while, you know, somebody comes and gets them stuff. They can't go inside. You know, this again has contributed to the demonization of people who have legitimate medical conditions. And I think this this would be a way forward to help protect people.
Absolutely. I mean, we're divided enough. We don't need coworkers splitting with each other over, I don't want to share the lunchroom with that guy because I found out he's not vaccinated for this and this. And it doesn't necessarily even have to be a vaccine for the flu or COVID. I mean, there's a lot of things. Or there might be an employer saying, I don't want to hire that person because they have a family history of heart conditions and I might end up with them sick too often. I mean, there's just the reasons are too long to count as to why medical records need to be kept as private and personal as possible. And we've opened the door to spreading those. That's a very dangerous precedent.
And this is where you hit the nail right on the head. The government has never, nowhere in Canada, nowhere in the world, no government has ever articulated a limiting principle whereby our individual rights can be superseded by these vaccination mandates. These vaccination mandates, everybody who's honest will admit that they trample over people's individual rights to privacy, to medical non-coercion, to non-discrimination. And you can argue, some people might argue, okay, in some cases, in emergencies, we need to trample over people's rights so that we can protect people. I mean, that's already a difficult and a dangerous argument. It's a slippery slope to follow down. But if that's the argument that you're making, that you need to put a mandate in place to protect people, what is your limiting principle? Are you going to now say that people who have other diseases can't participate in society? Are you going to say that people who look a certain way, who have a certain type of medical history or a certain kind of ethnicity or a certain kind of sexual orientation can't participate in society? I mean, that might seem like a stretch, but it really isn't. I mean, what you're essentially saying is that people who have made a certain medical decision are going to be isolated from society, and we are going to trample over their rights. Why? What is your limiting principle? Where do you draw the line for doing that? And no government has articulated where that line is. If you can draw that line clearly, right, at least I could respect that. At least I could say, okay, fine, you have the line there, and you guys are, you know, maybe petty tyrants, but at least you've drawn the line. Nobody has done that. They've acted in an arbitrary manner. And, you know, now we see that with even Trudeau federally, he's refused to speak with the truckers who are demanding an end to the vaccination mandates. And he hasn't laid down the line whereby he would actually let go of these mandates. Yesterday, there was a vote. The Conservative Party, I think Candice Bergen, tabled a motion for the Liberals to end the vaccine mandates, or at least put a plan forward to end the mandates. Very moderate, very slight kind of motion, and they rejected it. They rejected it along with the NDP. I mean, this is not a mature government that we're talking about. These are people who are petty, who are a little bit, arrogant and full of themselves, and who are actually not following the science. Theresa Tam has said that, we need to re-examine these restrictions. And throughout Canada, we look and we see that people are saying, these vaccination mandates, these vaccination passports, they don't make sense anymore. Let go of them. Actually, for those of us who are following the science more closely, like you have, Cory, and your viewers, we've known that for a long time. We've known that for about a year that doesn't make any sense. This is just an effort at power, and this is and Trudeau has shown that already with his implementation of the Emergency Measures Act as well.
Yeah, I mean, the numbers are coming in. We can't pretend we're in the first few months of this any longer. And I mean, if I could see a demonstration of efficacy from these measures and these intrusions in our lives, I still probably wouldn't like it because I don't like the government intruding in any part. But I would be a little more comfortable if we could see that, hey, every place that's brought in these passports or these travel restrictions has found that infections and deaths dramatically dropped, and it's effective and long term, not just a hiccup or a dip in the chart. But we're not seeing that. We're not seeing that at all. And as you said, it's like Johns Hopkins. We're not talking about YouTube University. We're talking about solid, accredited individuals are coming out and saying, look, we've looked at the data, we've looked at things now, and these just aren't effective. Yet we have a government who insists on clinging to these mandates to the point of invoking the Emergencies Act. It's insane.
Absolutely. And, even early on in 2020, Jay Bhattacharya of Stanford University, Martin Kulldorff of Harvard University, Sunitra Gupta of Oxford University, David Katz of Yale, a whole bunch of leading epidemiologists and scholars were saying that lockdowns are not going to work to battle COVID. What you need is focused protection of the elderly, people who have pre-existing conditions, people who are going to get very sick and end up in the ICU. You need to focus your protection on that and let everybody else live their lives normally, give them information that they can use to protect themselves. But other than that, don't trample down on society. Don't trample down on individual rights. Let people live their lives normally. And, many people, you talk to people and many people don't know that these top scholars have said that lockdowns don't work, that, vaccination mandates, vaccination passports are just overly coercive. Even Martin Kulldorff has recently said that in the Brownstone Institute. It's absurd now that universities in Canada, across Canada, who should actually be following the science, are rejecting the science and are asking their students and their staff and their faculty to be vaccinated in order to be present on campus. It's absolutely crazy, including my own university, Brock University, which is one of the most stringent vaccination mandates in this country, and has actually gone after professors and students who refuse to, give in to their vaccination mandate or disclose their private medical information. These are universities not following the science, and I really fear for the future of academia.
Yeah, well, I fear for a lot of things. We're in such a crazed time, but hopefully we can start coming out in the right direction. And I appreciate your writing, I think, in a proactive way. It's again saying, okay, we're not going to say, everything's done, we're back to normal once these are dropped. We need to follow through, and we need to follow up, and we need to make sure this doesn't happen again, and make sure we've learned from it. So where else can we find information on what you're doing? And do you write for any other publications or things like that?
Well, I write occasionally, but my website is corneliuschristian.com, and you can find me there.
Okay, excellent. And you're at Brock University. Well, I appreciate that, Cornelius. I hope we get some more guest columns out of you soon, and hope we can talk again on the show sometime.
Thank you for having me, Cory.
All right, thank you very much. So yeah, isn't it nice to get I think we've had two guests in a row with some nice heavy doses of common sense out there. I think we were all very overdue for it, and I really appreciated Mr. Christian's column that came out. Again, just let's examine things, let's set aside the rhetoric, let's set aside the ideology, and just start looking at things, and don't let these politicians off the hook just because they've backed off on the mandates. I mean, we're not talking about running up screaming with the pitchforks, but at the same time, we have to hold them responsible for what their actions have been in this last couple of years. Before I get on further in the show here, I'm going to speak about our sponsor one more time, especially in a time when the government's seizing money off of citizens or talking about doing it, and that's Bitcoin. Well, these guys have been sponsoring us for some time. If you want to get into Bitcoin, these guys are the ones who are going to bring you there safely, show you how to get there. You always control your own Bitcoin. And it's digital currencies. They sound a little convoluted, confusing, nerve-wracking. It's your money. You should be concerned. I mean, you want to be careful with it. These guys help you every step of the way. They have white glove service. You can have free one-on-one consultations with a real person in Edmonton, Calgary, Montreal, or Winnipeg. And then anywhere else in Canada, you can get a virtual consultation. Like, they will talk with you, answer your questions, not some giant PDF file where you have to self-study and try and figure out how to do it. They'll help you set up a wallet. They'll help you understand what Bitcoin is and how it can help you control your own money. So check them out, bitcoinwell.com. Take control of your money. All right, let's see. I'm going to run through some more of the news going on. Oh, I do want to talk about my old buddy, old Gil McGowan, you know, the head of the Alberta Federation of Labor. And he's been there a long time. Boy, if you get to know Gil, you realize that it kind of like the prime ministership, you don't have to be all that smart to rise to the top somehow. Because he's been there quite a while, and that guy's not much brighter than a tree stump. But either way, we watch him, we watch his process, and he's actually, I like to remind people, his role is constitutionally entrenched in the NDP. The NDP of Alberta, Rachel Notley's party, has to have a number of Alberta Federation of Labor members on their board controlling their party. So Gil McGowan, as goofy as he is a man of influence, at least in the NDP. So bear that in mind if you're ever considering going back to the NDP again. Anyways, Gil took the Alberta government to court. He wanted an injunction. You want to know what he was doing for us? You know what that labor leader was doing? He wanted to have the courts intervene and force children to wear masks in school. He wanted to mask our children. He wanted the hammer of the courts to override our government and force those kids to wear masks. In an act of good news, not an act of good news, an act of good judgment, the courts told him to roll up his challenge and stick it somewhere. They're not going to intervene. The kids can remain unmasked. You know, they were union-led, and they can always go, these were student walkouts. Oh, BS. They're union-led. And they try to get the kids to walk out and protest against being unmasked yesterday. It was pathetic. But getting back to, I like reporting on my torturous trip down mainstream media every day when I drive in and listen to talk radio, which we will replace, damn it. But they were talking about that and reporting on it. And they talked about up in Nelson Mandela High School in Calgary, 50 students went out and walked out. I mean, they forget to mention I think there's over 1,000 students there that didn't. How is this newsworthy? 50 kids played hooky. So what? Hey, I used to sneak up behind my school and smoke joints and cigarettes. They didn't report on it in the news. Meanwhile, up in Edmonton, there were dozens of concerned parents, quote unquote, union people, protesting, wanting their children masked up there as well. Don't give credence to this. This is a tiny, tiny minority. The vast majority are happy to see their kids unmasked. We know damn well the kids are happy to be unmasked. They're sick and tired of it. But our Federation of Labor wanted to try and use and abuse our court system to keep those kids masked, and they failed. Good. Let's see Gil have another long line of failures with any luck over time. Let's see, from Blacklocks, they're talking about the cabinet's going to be looking at changing COVID-19 rules for cross-border travelers. I think Dave mentioned that earlier as well. Of course, they won't say if it's influenced by Freedom Convoy protests. Again, I don't care. I don't care if they admit that it was influenced by that or not, just as long as they change it. That's what started this whole thing. And I mean, the cabinet yesterday also claimed the Freedom Convoy truckers pose a threat to national security. Where do you get this? And they're saying that the country is facing a largely foreign-funded, targeted, and coordinated attack on critical infrastructure and our democratic institutions. That's what Bill Blair told reporters. They're prepared to do whatever's necessary to restore order. As you can see there, man, Nico, he gets on these awesome graphics, So there. So if I'm reading it too fast, you can see the bulk there in that picture. This is absurd. We do not have a foreign takeover, concerted attack. We saw that. We saw that with the breakdowns. They're just trying to steal money. And this was Canadians, and it was over 100,000 Canadians who were donated to these sites as they're chasing the funds here, left, right, and everywhere, and trying to criminalize the ability to give some of your own money to a protest that you feel represents you. That's what they want to do. They want to criminalize it. They want to steal your money if you dare to donate to that. Do you understand how insane this is? And I mean, look online, look at American news, look at international news. The world is looking at us in horror. Canada has invoked the Emergencies Act, which again, as I said, read between the lines, is the War Measures Act. We just haven't had a war in a long time over some protesters in Ottawa. This is nuts. But, let's talk about other things in the cabinet, right? They lie. They lie all the time. Here's one right now. Cabinet's not even thinking of taxing Canadians' home equity, Housing Minister Hassan said yesterday. This has come up over and over and over again over the years. They keep putting out studies, proposing and trying to find a way to do a home equity tax. And then when they get caught, they say, we're not considering doing it. They're lying. They're lying to our faces. They want to come after your money in your homes, and they want to take capital gains on your primary residences. And They're going to eventually. Look at the precedents that we're setting right now. They literally want to steal the money from your bank account if you dare to fund a protest. Of course, they would steal the equity you've earned in your homes. And some of those studies, for those who haven't read them, some of the stuff they said, they talk about people winning the lottery. They said the reason you got home equity, some said your home equity grows while you're laying on the couch watching TV. That's literally what they said, these politics of sick envy. No, these are people who worked a whole lifetime to pay down their bloody mortgages and to maintain their homes and hopefully increase equity so they can retire on it or hand it down to their kids. And our government wants to steal that. It's disgusting. And it's not surprising anymore. Let's see here, the Privy Council office. Confidential research found Canadians increasingly unhappy with the cabinet's pandemic management, including an absence of a reopening plan. That's something that Cornelius spoke of as well. This polling report came in weeks after the election and saw the Liberals regaining office. So they know that we aren't liking where they're going, but it doesn't seem to have stopped them. I don't know what it will take at this point. What's this? CBC is using illegal hacked data to contact contributors to the convoy. I don't know. I mean, data's going all over. There's some crazy stuff going on. Nothing's going to surprise me anymore. Something's been hitting the news a lot too. I was going to talk to the lawyer for him, but he got taken over to Ottawa for a lot of things. Brian Peckford has still been speaking up a lot. For those not familiar with him, he was a prime minister of Newfoundland. He's the last living contributing author to the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and he's still concerned. I mean, he is very upset over the government trying to invoke the Emergencies Act, the government trying to crack down on citizens, on Canadians. This act is going to allow them to steal your money. I mean, they're talking about the few little things that it may do. We'll just do a couple of little things to bring these protests down. No. You can't just take a little bit of rights away. This is opening a floodgate, and it's a big one. And I mean, as was pointed out earlier, this has not been done since 1970. We're doing it over some protesters in Ottawa, some truckers. It's just frightening. And I mean, when that was invoked in 1970, they arrested without warrant, without charge, 500 people and held them. That's what totalitarian regimes do. Not saying that that's going to happen so far, but this is the first step. When you bring the act in like that, you're trying to get that kind of power. One of the things they talked about was being able to force tow truck companies to go tow vehicles. If they say, no, we don't want to do it, they say, too bad, we will arrest you if you don't. Think about that. You will be arrested if you don't work for the government. Do you understand how insane that sounds? Yet that's really what they want to do. That's really what's happening. Wake up. That's why, I don't care if it's minus 30 this Saturday. By the way, it's supposed to be quite nice. I'm going out there downtown and I'm going to protest this weekend. And I want everybody else to. We've got to stand up. This government has lost control, not just of themselves, but of us. And they want to bring down the hammer on us. And we can't let them. There's still time to turn back. There's still time to bring the internal pressure back into that government. As I said, a lot of those members of parliament are self-serving. If they think they're going to lose their jobs over this, they will fight, even if only behind closed doors. They might get Trudeau to make an excuse. Oh, we think we've accomplished enough and we'll take that legislation off the table. I don't care how and why they take it off the table. It's as long as they do. And if it comes to a vote, maybe we'll have pushed enough politicians to say, no, this is not required right now. We're going to vote against it. And if they do impose it, then we have to protest. And we have to protest like we've never protested before, guys. They're stealing our rights. This is not minor, not in the slightest, and over not nearly enough justification. Remember, when they brought it in 1950, and some people still don't, or 1970, some people still don't agree with it, the FLQ had killed 6 people. They had set over 500 bombs. They had done hundreds and hundreds of robberies over years. This is what it led to. They kidnapped and murdered a cabinet minister. And they'd kidnapped a foreign diplomat. That is where you bring in an act like this and put soldiers on the streets. Not because the people have bouncy castles on Parliament Hill. This is just beyond the pale. We have to stand up, guys. When you give freedoms away, you don't get them back easily. You don't. The vein's going down again. Okay. So I'm going to start winding things up. Again, that reminder, get on to westernstandardonline.com, guys. Take out a subscription. Get the full content, help us. We get more reporters on the ground that way. The more subscribers we got, the more advertisers we can bring in. And again, we can just keep getting out there and reporting this stuff because we know legacy media is feeding you nothing but crap. So if you want to get beyond the legacy media, get the real information like we're providing and a lot of other outlets out there. Take out a subscription. It's worth it for you. It's worth it for us. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, all of those social media majors. Tomorrow I'm going to have Mike Thomas in. He's a regular Western Standard columnist. I've had him on the show before. He's written some good stuff on the protests as well as on real estate trends. And I'm going to have another fella from the East Coast. And don't worry, guys, it's not Clinton. And we're going to talk about, again, some of the impacts of pandemic restrictions on people and how we've got to try and regain our liberty because it is under terrible threat right now. So thank you all for tuning in today, guys. It was a great show. I sure had some good guests. I'm looking forward to getting a lot more of them, and I will see you all tomorrow at 11:30.